All right, let's dive into one of the most important, most powerful pieces of the EU's big AI Act, Article 91. This is the tool they've built to bring some much-needed transparency to the world of artificial intelligence. It's important to note this analysis was carried out under the scientific supervision of Professor Vihar Kiskinov.
But first, let's start with a really basic question. When a powerful AI makes a mistake, and they do, who's responsible? If an AI turns down your loan application or shows you some really questionable news, or heaven forbid, gets a medical diagnosis wrong, who do you hold accountable? Where do you even start to look for what went wrong?
And that's where we run smack into what everyone calls the black box problem. You see, a lot of these advanced AI models work in ways that are, well, they're mysterious, even to the people who made them. The logic inside is so complex, you can't just trace the decision from point A to point B. And that mystery, that opacity, is a massive roadblock to making sure these systems are fair, safe, and most importantly, accountable.
So how did the European Union decide to tackle this? Their answer is Article 91 of the AI Act. And honestly, the best way to think about it is as a flashlight. It's the legal tool regulators can use to shine a light right inside that black box and get a better look at how these incredibly powerful systems are making their choices. Now, to really get a grip on how this regulatory flashlight works, we're going to break it down into 4 key parts, or pillars, that come straight from the law itself. We'll look at how it demands transparency, how it defines the scope of what regulators can ask for, how it assigns responsibility, and finally, how it creates a clear framework for the whole process.
Okay, let's start with the absolute foundation, the first and most critical pillar, the power to demand transparency.
At its very core, what Article 91 does is give the European Commission the legal power to go directly to the companies making these general-purpose AI models, we're talking the big ones like GPT, and say, we need to see your homework. They can request crucial information about how these systems are built, and that's the foundational power that makes everything else possible.
So why is that such a big deal? Well, it's how you check that these companies are actually following the rules of the AI Act. It's how you create real accountability for how the models are designed and what kind of data they were trained on. This means regulators can finally get a clear look at the technical documents, the data sets, the risk assessments, all the important stuff. And that is how we make sure that the AI screening your job application or curating your newsfeed is held to a genuinely high standard.
So the Commission has this power, but how far does it go? Let's move to our second pillar and see how this power was carefully sharpened to be both powerful and clear. This table actually shows a really interesting part of the legislative process. When this rule was first proposed, it was pretty vague. It just said the Commission could request documentation. But look at the final version. It's much more specific. It says the requests have to be linked to the obligations that providers already have under other parts of the law, specifically Articles 53 and 55. And that's not just some tiny legal tweak. It's a huge deal. By tying the requests to existing rules, the law puts clear boundaries on what regulators can ask for. This gives AI providers much-needed clarity. They know exactly what they need to be prepared to show. It strikes that balance between strong oversight and avoiding just random, open-ended fishing expeditions.
This leads us to a really important question, and our third pillar. If the Commission asks for this information, who is actually on the hook for getting it right?
Well, the law itself could not be more clear. This is a direct quote from Article 91, and it says that the provider, which it calls the client here, is fully responsible for the information, no matter who actually hands it over.
Let's just break that down because it's so critical. The buck stops with the AI provider. Always. They can't just hand this off to someone else and wash their hands of it. Even if they hire the most expensive law firm in the world to handle the request, the ultimate responsibility for making sure that information is complete and correct, that stays with them. There is absolutely no ambiguity.
Okay, so we know who's responsible. Now, how does this process actually play out in the real world? This brings us to our fourth and final pillar, the practical, step-by-step framework. It's not just some demand that comes out of the blue. There's a clear process. It usually starts with something called a structured dialogue, basically an informal chat to try and clear things up. If that doesn't work, then a formal request can be triggered, either by the Commission or by its team of experts. That's when a legally binding request goes out with a clear deadline. The provider has to respond, and if they don't, or if the information isn't right, that's when you get to enforcement. And we're talking about some pretty significant fines.
So we've just walked through those 4 pillars.
Let's step back for a second and put it all together to see the bigger picture of what's happening with AI governance.
What this all really comes down to is a classic, delicate balancing act. On one side, you need powerful, robust oversight to protect people and make sure these systems are accountable. But on the other side, you can't create rules that are so heavy-handed that they crush the innovation we need to make progress. And Article 91 is a perfect example of the EU trying to walk that very fine line.
So let's recap one more time. Article 91 is built on these 4 pillars. First, it creates the power to demand transparency. Then it defines the scope of that power so it isn't misused. Third, it assigns ultimate, non-negotiable responsibility to the provider. And finally, it creates a clear procedural framework so everyone knows the rules of the game. It's a really comprehensive approach.
And that, of course, brings us to the final, lingering question. The EU has spent years carefully building this regulatory flashlight. The rules are set, the responsibilities are clear, but in a field that is moving at an absolutely breathtaking pace, will a tool like this be agile enough and powerful enough to actually keep up? That, right there, is the million-dollar question for the future.